Hello everyone, this is Alex back with another image review session. I've got a couple coming up on the next couple of weeks as I start to have a look at some of the shots from my recent Red Sea trip in the early summer of 2025. If you do follow this channel, you'll have noticed that there are some short videos going up at the moment. And that's because on most of the workshops I run, someone or other, often me, but sometimes other people, will shoot a little bit of GoPro footage, usually blind, just with the camera running on top of the housing at various times during the trip. And rather than this sort of footage getting lost, I've been uploading daily sort of short clips of it. There's usually about 2 or 3 minutes from each trip up onto YouTube. Which are really there just as a memento, a memory from those trips. In many ways, it's the least impressive thing to come out of those trips because obviously the group's photos and my photos and the topside photos we take are usually the most impressive thing. And then the underwater GoPro footage is very much by accident, but I didn't want to lose it, and actually just sticking it up and storing it on YouTube where I can always download it again is a good place for me to put it. So that's why those are going up. Anyway, on to image reviewing. I've got 35-ish pictures from a recent Red Sea trip to work through. They're all shot with the Sony A1 and variety of different lenses. Mainly, I would say, fisheye, WACP and macro lenses. But I'll go into details on that. Strobes, I was using prototype versions of the Retro Pro Max 2 strobes. And Matthew and I are actually both going to talk about both those strobes in detail on the channel, on the Underwater Photography Show channel, and also Nauticam's MF03 lens that I was using on this trip as well, which I won't get into loads of detail on here, but do tune in to forthcoming episodes on the Underwater Photography Show where we can really dissect that gear. Okay, so let's dive into pictures. I know people always enjoy seeing the shots. So this is actually one of the first shots I took on the trip, and it was just really to see what the light was like from the Pro Max 2s. I'd never shot them before in their final form, and just to see what the light was looking like. It's mildly, very slightly changed from Retro's previous Pro strobes, right from the Pro to the Pro Max 1s. Retro have endeavoured to keep their light the same. And with the Pro Max 2, they've just gone for a slightly more, because it's got more power, to make more use of that power. They've given the strobe slightly more throw than the previous version. So I was just curious to see the difference. It does have a chunk more power, and it is a bit more noticeable, that power, because of the throw of the strobe. But we're talking pretty subtle differences here. Anyway, this shot, just some hard coral. This is taken at Chabalurg, where we often do check dives on the trips. This is just testing out the strobe, really. I remember this male birdmouth wrasse was cruising around the background of this shot, and I was just, although I was shooting the hard corals, I was waiting for him to come into a good position in the frame to take a picture. Next up is a moray eel. Just this one is at a dive site called Umgamar, although we call it Umanar. And it's this is just down by just down below one of the pinnacles on that dive site. This moray was sticking out of the reef, and I like the drama of shooting this one up into the sun. I shot him horizontally first, and then thinking about it, felt that it was probably a better vertical, and actually I've ended up favouring the vertical pictures. This is taken with the Nikon 8-15 lens. So unusually, on the first one was taken with the WACP-1. Unusually on this lens, on this trip, I took my Nikon 8-15 and dome port in addition to my Nikonos 13mm, and I didn't take my Nauticam FCP on this trip. I wanted to take the 8-15 with the dome to enable me to do split levels, and also I also like that lens on the Rex as well, because it's a little bit wider than either the 13mm or the FCP, and when you're trying to get those Rex in, every little bit you can get closer gives your picture more punch. So a slightly wider lens can be ever so useful there. So that's why I took that lens. This next picture is taken with the Sony 90, or it's actually taken with the Tamron 90mm, and a forthcoming lens from Nauticam called the MF03. I'm not going to dive into that now too much, but it makes the lens a lot wider and delivers really, really nice image quality. I'll zoom in on these guys so you can see. Let's try and zoom in again. So you can see, fantastic image quality. And if I zoom into something away from the center of the picture, you'll see really nice image quality away from the center as well. And this is a lens that you can take on and off underwater, so you can be shooting with your straight 90mm, and you can also shoot with what is basically the equivalent of a 50mm, all on the same dive. And it's a very, very valuable macro tool. And I have to say, once I had it, I didn't lend it around very much, because every time I was shooting macro, I always wanted to have it with me. It's such a valuable thing to have. This next shot is a school of Ehrenberg snappers. They are notoriously frisky. They look fantastic from about 30 meters away, about the limit of visibility. But as you get close, they never keep their formations, and they swoop around the place, and they're very uncooperative for photography. And in fact, everyone sees them in the Red Sea, and you never see photos of them, because as great as they look, no one ever gets a decent shot of them. So I think this is a pretty reasonable shot of them, knowing how frisky they are. I like how many fish there are all over the reef. This is obviously a very big scene. I wasn't able to get, strobe everywhere, just because it's such a massive area against the sun. But the power of those new strobes was very helpful for that. Right, now we come on to some pictures of lemon coral gobies. This was an unusual situation, because I was drawn to photograph these lemon coral gobies. On this site has a high density of them. Because I saw one lemon coral goby swim from one piece of coral to another. And that's something you don't spot very often. They don't venture away from their home corals. They're very territorial. And what that was it was, I presume, a male from one coral going over and trying to take over the other coral. And what ensued over about the next 45 minutes was these two lemon coral gobies beating the fins off each other. And you can see that they're looking pretty ragged in this picture. If I zoom in here, you can see that this fin is all bashed up at the top here. You can see the didn't zoom in the right place. It's not. Oh, come on. Anyway, you can see the pectoral fin here is all beaten up. This was right in the middle of a coral colony. The action was very fast and frenetic, so I didn't get any perfect images of the fight. And in fact, I hardly ever saw it. I just would see this instantaneous blur of fish, and then they would stop and pant and look at each other. But this is about the closest I got to an action shot of one of them just biting into the side of the other one, right in the middle of the coral. It was very hard to see, because you had to kind of find this thread a needle through through the thing to get the angle to get the shot of them, and then they would disappear into different bits of the coral fighting. And then here's another one of the two of them really having a go at each other. But I'd never seen this behaviour before, and they ended up, it was a very vicious fight, and they're obviously very territorial, and that's what leads to these very, very big fights. They're probably very rare, but when they happen. And as a result, the fish were both incredibly tatty by the end. Really, really, all the fins were torn, and there were big bruises and bashes on their sides of their bodies. And I've photographed lemon gobies a few times where they've had strong marks on them, and I presume that those marks come from one of these territorial disputes between, I presume, the males, because obviously if you control a coral colony, you control all the females in there, and you're the father of all the eggs. So it's a fight worth having if you're a lemon coral goby. But really interesting to see. I didn't get what I would say is a perfect shot of the fight, but I think all three of those shots can help tell a story. But not in one image. Sometimes photographers, we go, oh yes, well, as a photojournalist, I wanted to tell the story across three pictures. Well, I would have much rather have tried to get one shot that really tells the story. I'm happy with these three, but I felt that given the right opportunity, you could get an incredible shot of these guys fighting within the coral, should you happen to get a really perfect moment, and they weren't hiding behind a piece of coral or blocked by a foreground piece of coral. Anyway, moving on. This is a zoom blur image of a squirrelfish in a little coral cave, and I shot this straight, but I actually rather like the zoom blur effect. It was a long exposure anyway to get that blue to come out around the squirrelfish, and I thought putting a zoom in would make the picture a little bit more interesting, and I think it has. So this is taken on 0.4 of a second, zooming the lens during the exposure, and obviously all the areas where the flash hits, which is the face of the fish and the corals around it, are nice and sharp, but the zooming creates this explosion in amongst the ambient light, which I think is quite effective in this particular composition. I like the fact that the zoom doesn't dominate the picture, it runs through that central area. I'm going back to this full screen of them, or this grid view, so that you can read the camera settings on the right hand side. Okay, next up is a gathering, an evening gathering, which quite often happens with the masked butterfly fish. They usually just stay in pairs, not doing a lot during the day, and then in the evening they seem to whiz up and down the reef, often in little groups. And this was on an evening dive. You can see the sunlight at the top there, sort of the evening sun coming over the reef. And this group was sort of charging one way or another. I would have loved a really perfect formation of them. I mean, here there's one going the wrong way. There's one turning away. There's some smaller ones behind that are coming towards the group. But this was the best formation that I got. They're very beautiful fish, very characteristic of the Red Sea, although because they're such a beautiful, iconic fish, they do get used in advertising for all sorts of dive destinations around the world, despite being endemic to the Red Sea. But yeah, that's you can see one there. So yeah, it's but yeah, always a nice species to shoot. Right, now we move to a dive site called Abu, near Gifton. It's Abu Ramada. Just the name's just gone out of my mind for a second there. Anyway, this is a school of yellowtail goatfish there, and actually what we learned on this trip is, on the second dive of the day, all the day boats turn up on this dive site, and they tie up in rafts, and they create these beautiful beams of light between the rafts over the coral reef. And the goatfish, I think, seem to like the shade under the boat, so you often get these big schools of goatfish forming under the boats, and the boats provide this fantastic backdrop. And then you also get schools of striped fusiliers cruising through here as well as the goatfish. Here's some of the goatfish. And I think, yeah, it was just fantastic photo opportunity. There's some bubbles in the top of this one, which were not mine. I was controlling my breathing for the photography, but other photographers around me weren't looking after the water column quite as much. Maybe they had tighter lenses on, it didn't matter. But yeah, I would have liked this shot not to have the bubbles in, but so be it. I don't think it doesn't ruin the shot at all. They're not overly noticeable up there. There's so much content in this picture they don't stand out very much as they would if it was a very minimalist shot. Right, a couple of shots of a giant moray. This is George the giant moray up at the barge in Goobel. This is shot with the EMWL 160. Shot blind. I've increasingly, certainly on reef dives, I just don't bother putting on the middle extension, or I didn't even take it to the Red Sea, or the reversing viewfinder. I just shoot it blind. I find I can hold it pretty well in front of the subject, trust the autofocus, and it works really well actually, and it just makes the whole process nice and easy and saves me a bit of baggage weight on a trip where that lens is obviously you're probably only going to use it one dive. So yeah, it saves taking an extra kilo of bits to make it work properly. And yeah, this is shot with straight lighting, and then this is shot with a bit of backlighting. We often shoot morays this way as macro subjects, with a strobe coming from behind them and a little bit of fill just to bring out the eye and things from the front. I thought this would be quite fun to try this guy shooting with that kind of macro backlight effect we use on morays, but in this case doing it in a wide angle shot. Very close to the moray, just nearby, there was this incredibly friendly and very inquisitive little undulate or orange striped triggerfish that was very, very interested in its own picture in the screen on my GoPro camera or my action camera. It's a DJI one. And obviously on the front of it, it could see itself. And it was very keen on attacking that. And while it was busy trying to attack my housing, I was able to get some nice photos. Also with the EMWL on the same lens. I really like this one with the wreck behind. Just creates a lovely background to set this fish off against. And then this is taken half an hour or so later, when I'd been up to the boat and changed lens and came back down with the MF03. So I had a wider view than the straight macro, and this is a panning shot. The reef wasn't very exciting, so I actually felt that panning would just liven up the picture quite nicely, and I'd hoped it would work well with the stripes of the fish. I'm not sure it really did anything with the stripes, but I like how it made the reef look. So that's that one. And then still in Goobel, one of the classic Goobel subjects are the unicorn blennies, unicorn gobies, which are very, very tiny macro subjects. I shot this with the SMC3, but it's cropped. But actually, I've shot them a lot with the SMC2 and higher magnification shots, and I just find I have so little depth of field when I shoot them with too much magnification that the shots aren't good. So I'm currently, the way I shoot them is I shoot them with SMC3, which is already a strong magnification, but it's not so strong that I have no depth of field. And then what I do is I process them at super resolution, which gives me a big file. And then I can crop into it and still have a high resolution. So this version is still 6,000 pixels. And if we zoom in to 1:1, it's really sharp at one. Oh, this is zoomed in probably 200%. But if I can zoom it right in, you'll see that I didn't load that time. But the preview's not loading properly now. Now I've messed around with it. But if I can get back to the eye, you can see that the eye is really sharp and the details are really sharp. And I think this is, I prefer with this particular subject, that solution of not chasing, the same way I'd probably shoot with Shaun the Sheep as well, is not shoot it with super, super magnification, but instead shoot it with a lot of magnification, but not crazy amounts. Keep a reasonable amount of depth of field, then super resolution the file, and then crop it. So I still have a very high resolution picture, big enough to print A3 or anything like that, should any magazine or anyone need it as that. But still have decent depth of field in it. And at a pixel level, it still looks fantastic. Okay, some wide angle reef stuff now. This is at Shab Mahmood this is by the Dunraven Wreck. Just some nice Anthias on the reef top there. And then now into Ras Mohammed and some of the amazing soft corals around the tip of Ras Mohammed at Shark Yolanda reefs. Really beautiful scene, just soft coral going off everywhere. We'd always try and target dives there early in the morning to get the maximum soft coral amounts. Soft corals like shade and they like current, so early morning dives or late afternoon dives, you tend to get the best soft corals for daytime diving. And then obviously you also, dives where there's good current, you'll also get the soft corals out. This is a 90mm macro shot of a roving grouper. Very nice, very attractive, larger, sort of middle to larger group of species that you don't see nice photos of. And at Ras Mohammed, there's usually a few friendly ones because they do the group foraging with the moray eels and the bluefin trevallies and sometimes lyre-tailed groupers, sometimes Napoleon wrasse. And that little gang, when they're ganging together, are very, very approachable. And it's a great time to get portraits of that species that you don't see photographed very much. You sometimes get them at cleaning stations as well there. To Anemone City for a late evening dive, trying to catch the time when the anemones there ball up. I think we went about half an hour early, so we got some balling up, but we didn't get everyone balling up. They don't ball up right at sunset. It is that late afternoon they tend to ball up. I've never really understood why they ball up. My personal theory is it's actually after a day of absorbing sunlight and creating sugars in their tentacles. They ball up at the end of the day to squeeze squeeze their sort of fluids out of their tentacles, all that sugars out created by their endosymbiotic zooxanthellae, out of those tentacles and into their main body to absorb the nutrients. I have no idea if that's true or not, but it makes sense to me as to why each day they would ball up in that late afternoon, because they do close up a bit at night, but not as tightly balled up as they go in the late afternoon. And after this, they tend to reopen again. So it does seem to be something to do with that. I've never read anything about it, so I'll be interested to know if there is someone has figured out why, or there is a prevailing idea as to why they do it. But for me, I think it feels like, they've been absorbing sugar all day or creating sugar all day, and now they want to put it into their main body. Okay, some more reef wide angles taken around Ras Mohammed. This is a beautiful big pink soft coral with a Red Sea bannerfish hanging out next to it, creating a nice focal point in the picture. This is the bommy we call Alex's bommy, which offers so many different angles for photography, depending on which direction the light is coming from, the current is coming from. And this is when the current is coming from the Gulf of Aqaba. And this front edge has got all these lovely pinky purple soft corals that open up. Crowds of Anthias. You often have to herd the Anthias back closer to the reef, otherwise you end up with lit Anthias and unlit reef. So you kind of you kind of loom over the Anthias and then swoop down to take this photo, and it pushes the Anthias back against the corals, and so you get light on the Anthias and the corals. These will all be taken very similar settings, f13, ISO 400, 180th, not exactly surprising settings for me to be using underwater. Now a bit of wide angle with the WACP. This was taken, I'm sure, with the Nikonos fisheye, Nikonos 13mm fisheye. This one was taken of the anemone fish was taken with the MFO3, and then these two are with WACP. I'm just shooting some of the soft corals that way. Kind of creates a very dominant foreground look, which I quite like. You can do these little clusters with the WACP better than you can with the fisheye. So you get these very content heavy pictures. I wouldn't want all my wide angle to be so messy, but I do like the energy that these shots have, and I think that was something I was trying to get into my wide angle this time on this trip, with these slightly messy but full of action and moving fish and just rich reef feeling in the pictures. Right, this is the next shot is a panorama shot with the WACP again, but inside one of the overhang caves at Shark Observatory. And I had the idea for this shot, then had to wait ages for all the other divers all my group to move on out of this scene so I could finally do the shot. And having waited so long, I had to process it. So I don't think the picture is great. I think there is potential in this scene, but it will be much better. It needs something in those windows. So I should have, waited for a passing school, although I don't know how well that will panorama. Or do this shot again, but get a couple of people to pose on either side. And then I think this shot could work really nicely. Particularly with, model on each side of this frame, I think would look really good. I could Photoshop one in, but first of all, I don't want to do that. But secondly, it would look pretty fake if I did. But yeah, it's not great. It's a bit boring as a photo, but I think there's potential there. So it's one of those shots you take, and then maybe, sometime in the future you go, oh, I know what we can do on this dive. We can get that shot. This is another of the cave overhangs at Alley, at Shark Observatory. This one with glassfish in and lionfish and a couple of divers. Also keen to photograph the same scene. There's Massimo at the top there. Actually, I think he adds a lot to this picture, having that diver in the background. So at the time I was like, I wish those divers weren't there. But actually, I think the picture's more interesting for having the divers in the picture. Then up to Sharm el Sheikh area, and this is just a dust dive at Temple. The light and the water there is always so beautiful. It's always great visibility. The water's always calm because of the high cliffs protecting the bay. And you just have, in the late afternoon, the most stunning sunlight underwater there. So you really go in to shoot anything you can with this amazing sunlight. That's the only one I've bothered to process so far, but that looks really, really nice. And then once you finish doing the sunset, I tend to jump and grab a macro lens. This is with MFO3, and just a nice little, it was just this weird gathering of white-bellied damselfish that were all swimming in this little group, all rough, close enough to each other that I could get them all in focus, creating rather an unusual, interesting image. Okay, the final few are from the Thistlegorm. This picture here is of a BSA motorbike on Thistlegorm, a classic angle. We call this one the exhaust bike because you can see the exhaust very nicely and can frame it against the blue. I like the position of the two soldier fish in this one, but it's a picture that I've taken a load of times. But in the same way, with the big Thistlegorm project, it is nice to reshoot certain subjects year after year. You can document change. You don't know what change might happen in the future, so it's always good to have things that you shoot every year. This is not very far from the other shot. The other shot was, if you look in the top, well, the blue on the right hand side of this frame, that's where the previous motorbike was. And now further down that starboard side of the Thistlegorm, right up against the rear bulkhead of hold number 2. This is one of the Bedford OYC trucks. And I like this particular one because you can see the seat inside it. So it's a slightly different one to shoot. And you've got the blue behind it as well, which creates that nice feeling of depth. Probably a very long exposure. 1.6 seconds to get that blue to burn in to create the space in this one. But nothing blurs because it's all in the dark. So you end up with a very sharp picture. There's a bit of blur in the blue on the right. And there's a bit of blur in the fish, shot with rear curtains. So at least the trails from the fish go behind them. Probably another long exposure. Yeah, this is a second, this one. This is a shot of the Zwickey, the Albion AM643 Zwickey refueler trucks. So these are trucks used to refuel aircraft. And there's 6 of them on the wreck and 3 on each side. And there's a relatively new hole in the bulkhead between hold 2 and hold 1 that this photo is actually taken by me coming through the hole. I'd obviously beamed through the hole to set the lighting up, but then went back through the hole to shoot the pictures. And that hole allows you to be a little bit further back. So we didn't used to be able to get this shot because there was no space for you to take the picture, whereas now we can get this slightly wider view. So I've done this a couple of times in recent years, just because it's a new shot relatively for us. Okay, inside the Janis D now. There wasn't a lot of fish in the engine room this year, just the sweepers. Which are not the most attractive fish, but the on this occasion the redmouth grouper was chasing them around, so I processed out a picture of him chasing the sweepers around. It wasn't peak of the action. I'd loved it if he'd really come towards the camera, but nonetheless it tells a bit of a story. And then more classically on the Janis D, she is definitely collapsing into the seabed, as she gets older. But it's still just such a great angle. And we dived it slightly later in the day than we normally do. And later in the day, this view works better, just coming slightly more round onto the port side and shooting her from the sand. So it's a great time of day for doing this classic black and white shot. We just had the end of the sunbeams in the sunbeam room on the Janis D. And actually I found this little soft coral, which I'd not photographed before, that I could light up and have some beams behind, which was pretty cool. There was almost a really, really nice butterfly fish in this picture. I remember watching him, willing him to come into this space, and he never quite did. But I still chose this shot too. This is the closest I got to. This picture would be great if I had that butterfly fish in that gap. But never mind. And then the final 2 shots... also from the Janis D, this is Henry posing with a... there's actually a photo of me, she took while I was taking this picture. Taking a picture with a phone housing. I think phone housings, as we've spoken about on the Underwater Photography Show, are a big thing. Certainly for the future of underwater photography. And so getting shots of people using them whenever I get the chance, I'll always make the most of. And, over time, people have different housings. This is a sea life one. So it's a nice chance to get some shots if someone's using them. So just a classic shot of the bow of the Janis D with the mast coming out, which has always got coral and fish on it. And it's just a nice spacious area with lovely blue water and a great place for posing that type of image. And then finally a split level image of a sunset in the Red Sea. Beautiful corals, beautiful sunset, classic shallow water Red Sea, and just makes me want to go back there. I did try a new solution for keeping the dome clean on this trip, which worked brilliantly, but I'm not sure it's going to do any long-term harm to the domes. So I've actually my friends at Nauticam actually are testing it, and their geeky guys will test it and come back to me as to whether it's going to do any harm to domes. I don't think it will, but it's good to get it tested. And once they've told me, my intention is to tell everyone what the product is. I just don't want to yet, because I don't want people to run out, use it, and then go, Alex, that thing you suggested ruined my dome. So yeah, once I've got the okay from them, I'll share that on. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that one. There's another batch of these Red Sea ones ready to go, so I'll get these uploaded as soon as I can. Okay, bye.